It's time for the whole 9 yards. Hello again, everyone. I'm Ralph Ventre, fired up and ready to go for week 3 of the FCS season. LIU is idle this week, but 8 NEC teams are in action, 7 games on the docket, a lot to get excited about, and I'll explain why in the opening drive. Let's get this drive started with the Sacred Heart Pioneers. Sacred Heart will face a Patriot League member for the second week in a row when it travels to Lafayette. Mark Nofri's Pios kicked off its home schedule with a 30-10 win over Bucknell in week 2. In fact, Sacred Heart has won its last 3 games against Patriot League members. In terms of its series with Lafayette, the Pioneers have taken the last 4 against the Leopards. SHU will look to repeat the recipe it cooked up last week when the defense bottled up Bucknell and graduate transfer quarterback Logan Marchie threw for 316 yards. Now, Marchie admits that his success came as a result of study and game preparation.
You get in the film room, you work out the kinks of last week, and just kind of studying the defense, what their tendencies are, and being a fifth-year guy, the experience of seeing so many different defenses, you learn that kind of maturity and when to throw the ball away and when to cut your losses.
Keeping with the NEC versus the Patriot League theme, we go to Smithfield, Rhode Island. Bryant will look to become the second NEC team to defeat Fordham this season. Chris Merritt's Bulldogs kicked off the year with back-to-back road losses to CAA teams. Now it's time for the Bulldogs' home opener at Burns Stadium, and Coach Merritt has seen a few things to like in recent weeks, hoping that carries over Week 3 against Fordham.
Well, I think offensively our run game got better. I think our first down efficiency got better for us. Obviously, we can't throw the football to the other team, can't turn the ball over, and that just put us behind just put us behind in a position where it's tough to come back from. On the kickoff, special teams turnover also hurt as well. Defensively, I think that in the first half there were 3 or 4 drives. There were 3 and out. Held them to less than 100 yards passing and less than 3 yards of pass attempts. So I think that these are all things to build off of, and we just need to keep moving forward.
Moving down the docket to CCSU, the Blue Devils are 2-0 for the first time since 2006. They hit the road looking for their first 3-0 start since 1973. Ryan McCarthy will lead his team up against Pioneer member Valparaiso. It'll be the first ever meeting between the Crusaders and CCSU, a Blue Devils team coming off 2 close games, both won in the final seconds on field goals from Francis Cole. Out to Moon Township for the annual rivalry game between Robert Morris and Pioneer Football League member Dayton. Now, the Dayton Flyers are coming off a great showing out west. Robert Morris, on the other hand, they're looking to break into the win column, and in order to do so, they'll have to take care of the football. The Colonials were hurt immensely by losing 2 fumbles inside the opponent's 5-yard line in a Week 2 setback to Kentucky State. Now they have an opportunity to right the ship against Dayton and get back to basics, establish what could be a potent rushing attack, and protect the football. Dayton and Robert Morris live on NEC Front Row. Moving on to the lone NEC versus CAA matchup in week 3. Wagner at Stony Brook. Both teams coming off disappointing week 2 losses. Stony Brook dropped a lopsided contest at FBS member Utah State. Meanwhile, Wagner was shocked by Division II member East Stroudsburg. Now, the Seahawks' best bet may be to establish the run behind sophomore Dimitri McKenzie. McKenzie averaging 7 yards per carry thus far this season, 3 touchdowns in his first 2 games. That, however, won't necessarily be easy going up against the Stony Brook team that bottled up Bryant's rushing attack back in week 1. In addition to its effective run defense, Stony Brook poses a challenge for a number of other reasons, as Wagner head coach Jason Hoteling explains.
Looking at this team the first 2 weeks, it's evident why they were a playoff team, and they're athletic. I think their defensive line is definitely the most athletic we've blocked. The linebackers, the secondary, everybody's a junior or senior, it seems like, or a transfer on their defense. I think they'll run to the football. They'll do a good job. They'll play hard. It's a really sound football team defensively. Offensively, they do a little RPO. They're kind of RPO based, a little bit of 12. They always block well. Chuck does a good job over there with the offensive line, and he's always like to run the football and things. So they have a really talented team, offense, defense, and special teams wise. And I'd say it's the most talented football team we've faced to date this season.
2 more games to tackle on the week 3 docket. First, let's go to Youngstown, Ohio, where the Duquesne Dukes will look to make a statement. The defending NEC champions kicked off the 2019 schedule by outclassing D2 member Walsh at home in week 2. But now comes the real challenge for the Dukes. 3 straight road games, starting with a historically tough opponent in Youngstown State. Now, Bo Pelini's Penguins are also undefeated. They've won their first 2 games of the season, and they've done a boatload of scoring in those 2 weeks, averaging 49.5 points per victory. The Duquesne defense will have its hands full, but it certainly has plenty of talent. The Dukes have a preseason All-NEC selection at each level of the unit. Cam Carter on the line, Brett Zanato linebacker, and Reed Harrison Ducros in the defensive backfield. On the other side of the ball, Duquesne features All-American running back A.J. Hines. The Walter Payton Award hopeful kicked his season off in style. He went for 100 rushing yards for the 21st time in his career, doing so in limited action against Walsh. Now he'll look to carry the load for the NEC preseason favorite at Youngstown State, live on ESPN+. And our final matchup on the Week 3 docket is a continuation of the welcome tour for Merrimack College. The next stop on the tour, Loretto, Pennsylvania, home of the St. Francis Red Flash. Both teams already have a victory on the board this season, but both teams are coming off Week 2 defeats. 2 players to watch in this one. They are tall, capable, young wide receivers. For Merrimack, sophomore Johnny Rosario introduced himself to NEC fans in last week's featured game against CCSU, setting up the Warriors with a key red zone opportunity with a big-time play. Then on the other side, it's E.J. Jenkins, the former high school teammate of SFU quarterback Jason Brown. Well, he has touchdowns in each of his first 2 games. He went for over 100 yards in the Week 1 win over Lehigh. Rosario and Jenkins, they're both tall, physical targets, and they are both averaging more than 22 yards per reception. You can see them and a whole lot more on NEC Front Row this Saturday. Let's check in on the NEC stock market. I'll tell you whose value is on the way up. Sacred Heart's run game returned to its 2018 form last week, and Julius Chestnut was a key reason why. The Pioneers piled up more than 500 yards of offense in a 30-10 victory over Bucknell. As a team, 5.5 yards per rush attempt. Chestnut was the driving force behind that attack, 7.7 yards per carry. He rushed 21 times for 162 yards. His 187 scrimmage yards were the most by an NEC player in a game through the season's first 2 weeks. Now, this is nothing new for Chestnut. He averaged 7 yards a carry in Week 1 against Maine, a national power known for its tough defense against the run. And last year, as a freshman, Chestnut averaged 6.1 yards per carry for the NEC's top-ranked rushing offense. So it's no sophomore slump for this guy. Sacred Heart sophomore running back Julius Chestnut, his stock is on the way up. I'm calling my Twitter timeout, taking a look at the tweet sheet, and this one from Craig Haley popped up. The FCS national editor for stats is looking ahead to the Week 3 matchup between Duquesne and Youngstown State. He says that the winner of this one is likely bound for the top 25. I don't necessarily disagree with him, but my question is, why is either team not already in the top 25? More specifically, Duquesne, they were in my preseason top 25. They return a lot of firepower from a championship team that won an FCS playoff game in 2018. They beat Towson in that playoff game, which is currently ranked in the top 10 in the FCS. Now, Craig also points out that the Missouri Valley Football Conference has had its way with Northeast Conference teams over the year. In particular, Duquesne is 0-5 against Valley football teams. But they can make people forget that with a statement victory on Saturday. It won't be easy, of course. Dukes at the Youngstown State Penguins. I'll be watching. Looks like Craig Haley will be too. That's amazing, bro. What has me in a state of amazement this week? Well, it's a player that's familiar to the program. In fact, I mentioned him in this segment back in Week 1, but his most recent performance warrants another mention. St. Francis U linebacker Dejan Lee was back in his native Virginia in Week 2, going up against FCS juggernaut James Madison, and well, it was more of the same from Lee. 3.5 tackles for a loss against the Dukes, including a key hit on a 3rd and 1 from inside the SFU 3-yard line. Now, when you look at his game log, you might think to yourself, well, Dejan Lee, this guy should be an all-CAA player, because in his last 3 games combined against CAA teams, he has 9.5 tackles for loss. 41 and a half hits behind the line of scrimmage for his career, and that is first amongst FCS active career leaders. And stats amazing. As we plan on doing every week here on the Whole 9 Yards, it's time to chop it up with Rick Saratella of NFL Draft Bible. I spoke with Rick earlier in the week, and he's pretty pumped up for a particular Week 3 matchup. He talks about that and more in this week's Chop Shop. Let's get right to it. Let's start chopping it up. What did you see down in Harrisonburg, St. Francis at JMU? Obviously, JMU, an FCS juggernaut, number 2 in the country, and they look pretty good. But it seemed to me, at least, that St. Francis did some good things at different points in the game, and even though the score got out of hand, I think the Red Flash probably we'll see some decent stuff on tape. I don't know. What are your impressions, Rick?
The quarterback showed some potential. We talked about him on last week's episode. Lee on the defensive side, got into the backfield a little bit, showed some flashes there. And then, Christian Eubanks was a guy. They got some young, talented players now, especially up front on the offensive line. I noticed they had a couple of freshmen and sophomores starting on that offensive line. So Christian Eubanks, kind of moving around, playing a couple different spots, which is going to bode well for his pro potential, because the more you can do, the more valuable you can be at the next level. So he's now started at, I think, right tackle, left guard, right guard. Hey, all of a sudden, now you've got a versatile guy, a backup that can play 4 positions. So I liked what I saw from Christian Eubanks. And then this number 1, you put him on my radar last week, this tall, lengthy wide receiver.
Jenkins, Jenkins.
And I rode the elevator with some of the St. Francis coaches, and I said, God, you guys always have a tree trunk wide receiver each and every year. And I think he's a freshman or a sophomore, but he's a legitimate, he's legitimate 6'6", 6'7", and he's going to be a problem in the red zone. It's good to get some film against a draftable corner in Rashad Robinson, James Madison. Robinson, we saw what Jimmy Moreland's doing now in the pros. Robinson's kind of the next in that pipeline. I think he's got a very good chance of being drafted, and now he's got some film against one of these top prospects.
All right, now what about one to watch for Week 3? 8 of the 9 NEC teams will be in action. Which team will you be watching this weekend? What's your game of the week, Rick?
I'm really excited about this Duquesne-Youngstown State matchup because just like James Madison, I think these are 2 teams that are going to be in the mix at the end of the season. Coach Schmidt is probably one of the best in the business, in my opinion. This man knows his football. He's doing it with only 37 scholarships down at Duquesne. So the success that he's had with the limited resources, I definitely give him a lot of credit. So I know he was excited about the quarterback, Daniel Parr, what he brings to the table in terms of mobility, a little bit more of a dual threat than, say, a Dylan Buechel a couple years ago we saw had some success. Parr is more of a dual threat guy. And then in that backfield, A.J. Hines, he's just rolling along. Like he said on Media Day, it's time to get that train rolling. He had a big week last week against Walsh, one of the NEC players of the week. And then they have a Penn State running back now, Mark Allen, who's sharing the backfield with an A.J. Hines. So there's some big-time players. Sterling Jenkins, another guy from Penn State. These are 2 FBS Power 5 conference recruits playing on the Duquesne team. And then don't forget about Cam Carter from Last Chance U. A lot of people out there that watch Last Chance U know about Cam Carter. And Coach Schmidt said, I'm glad I didn't watch the show because of what people have said about him. He might have been a little bit more skeptical to bring him onto this program, but he said he's been nothing but mature. He's now a father, so a new level of maturity. But more importantly, his off-season workout regimen, his conditioning has gone up. And I think that, that is going to bode well on the defensive side. So Duquesne, I'm looking forward to some of these guys that they've brought in, whether it be from the Penn State, from the Last Chance U, and intertwined with some of the guys that have already been there and established in Parr and Hines.
All right, Rick. Sounds like a good one. Youngstown, Ohio. The Dukes will have an opportunity to make a statement against Bo Pelini and what has historically been one of the top programs in the FCS. Duquesne at Youngstown. I'll be watching it. Rick will have an eye on it. And as always, it was a pleasure to chop it up with you, Rick. We'll do it again next week. For now, Ralph Ventre, Rick Saratella of NFL Draft Bible. This is the NEC Football Chop Shop. Now, before we go, it's time for the Did You Know? Did you know that CCSU place kicker Francis Cole became the first Blue Devil kicker to convert on two 40-plus yard field goals in the same game since 2005? Cole, who was named the FCS Stats National Special Teams Player of the Week, opened the scoring for CCSU against Merrimack with a 42-yard field goal. Then he capped the victory with a tie-breaking kick from 44 yards out that went through the uprights with only 3 seconds remaining. It was the second week in a row he has provided the tie-breaking kick in the final seconds. One more nugget on Francis Cole. Did you know he owns the record for longest field goal in CCSU history, a 50-yarder in 2018? So that'll do it for our Week 3 edition of the Whole 9 Yards. Thanks for taking this ride with me. We'll do it again next week. But until next time, I'm Ralph Ventre for NEC Front Row.